angel's been showing him the beast with the 7 heads and 10 horns. And now as it finishes up in chapter 17, verses 15 through 18, we're going back to this great whore that started out in verse 1. And just to refresh our memories a little bit about that, whatever this entity is, it's called either the great whore or the woman. And the reason for that is when it's referred to as the great whore, it's talking about this entity's involvement in things that are not of God, right? Things that are anti-God. Because if you think of the word whore in the natural sense, what do you think of, right? You think of a woman who's not faithful to their husband. They don't bring their family a good name. They may be out using their bodies to make money. So that's what we think of, right? Well, in the Greek mindset, what that is it's that, plus it was also about merchandising and trade. Because that's basically, if you have a woman who's using their body to make a living, it's commerce and trade. But in the Greek mindset, in John's day, it was much broader than just that. You know, it involved any kind of commerce and trade that was not on the up and up. You know, maybe they were ripping people off, maybe there was some immorality to it. But whatever it was, and whatever it is, it's not a standard that would be approved of by our God.
Human trafficking.
Yeah. So we have to, when it's talking about this entity as the whore, that's what it's talking about. And then when we go to verse 3, it switches and it's calling this same entity the woman. So if you look up that Greek word for woman, a woman is someone who is loyal to their husband. They bring a good name to their family. You know, they have a lot of good qualities. But in the sense here, in the symbolic sense that it's talking about here, it's talking about this entity. When it speaks of her as a woman, it's talking about her loyalty to the beast kingdom, her loyalty to darkness. Anything that is opposed to God, she's loyal to that. And she rides upon the beast. And we talked about how they were separate, right? This beast from the bottomless pit with the 7 heads and 10 horns was a completely separate identity than this woman who rode with him. Like they went in the same direction, just like if you ride a horse, you're going in the same direction, but you're a separate living being. You're not, you and the horse are 2 different living creatures. Well, that's how it is with this woman and this beast from the bottomless pit. They're 2 separate creatures, but they're working together and they're going the same direction and they're bound together. We see by that color scarlet, which represents sin. It represents anything that's not of God. So anything that opposes God, they're in together in that. So going back to verse 15 then, this angel is going to start to show John this woman now. And he says, the first thing he says is, the waters which thou sawest where the whore sitteth. And that's exactly what we read in verse 1 of 17, the great whore that sitteth on many waters. So now he's going to tell him the identity of those waters, what the symbolism is of that. And it says there, peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So basically, the waters are all different people in this world. Doesn't matter what nationality, what culture, what religion, but they are peoples from all different backgrounds throughout the world that this whore sitteth on, which means that she's kind of controlling them, right? The word sitteth means to occupy. So this is where she occupies. She occupies among all the peoples of this world. She's working within them, within the waters. And it has to do, remember, with commerce and trade. That's what, if you want to say she has a kingdom, that's what it is. It's involving commerce and trade, and it involves people from all around the world, from all different backgrounds. And then we go into verse 16, and now it's going to go back and talk about the horns. You remember we talked about the horns last couple months, and in chapter 17, verse 12, it talks about the 10 horns, which they saw, they're 10 kings, which have no kingdom, but they're going to have a kingdom with the beast for 1 hour. So we had these 10 horns, which are going to get a kingdom. And when they achieve this kingdom, they're going to have 1 hour as rulers over this kingdom with the beast, who only has a short space. So you have the beast that has a short space in all that he's going to do. And then these horns, when they get their kingdom, they're going to have an hour, which is like even smaller within that short space. But it's funny, they start talking about the horns. So this is before they get their kingdom, okay? Because it's referring to them as horns. And it says, the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, it says, these shall hate the whore. So there's going to arise some kind of a problem within the beast kingdom. You're going to have the beast from the bottomless pit, and he has these 7 heads and 10 horns, and these 10 horns, which are beyond the veil, right? We talked about them being demonic forces that we can't see, and we don't really know exactly what they're doing because we can't see and interact with them in our realm, our natural world, but we feel the effects of it because they work through people, but they're, from the other side of the veil. So we have these 10 horns, and they're going to hate this woman, this entity in the merchandising and trade who is working through all the peoples in the world. So there's going to be some unrest in the darkness, the kingdom of darkness here. And when you hate something, you detest it, right? You don't want nothing to do with it. And that's how they're going to be when it comes to this entity. And it says they're going to make her desolate and naked. So if you look at the symbolism of that, if something is desolate, if you study the Greek word for desolate, it means to remove their strength. And if you remove the strength, then it just disintegrates. And when I was studying this, the analogy I thought of was a plant. Most of us have had a house plant or have, had some kind of contact with a house plant in our life. If you take that plant out of the window, away from the sunlight, and stick it someplace and don't water it, it's going to shrivel up and die. It's going to disintegrate. And why? Because you've taken its power away. It gets power from the sun. It gets power from the water. And that's what keeps it alive. Well, that's kind of what's going to happen here, because there's only 2 kingdoms, right? There's only the kingdom of God and the kingdom of darkness. So if these 10 horns, if they're going to be at odds with this entity that's the whore, and they're going to make her desolate, they're going to cut off the power, because she's getting her power from where? The beast, who gets it from Satan. And then she's going to shrivel up and, just wither away, because she doesn't have a source of power, and naked. And that word naked is just to expose. We have clothes on that covers us, but if we take our clothes off, we're exposing ourselves. So that's what they're talking about. All this merchandising and trade that she's involved with now, these 10 horns are going to expose all that. And what's going to happen when they expose it is that people are going to start realizing that there's something wrong with all of this. Whatever this is she's doing with all these people throughout the world, manipulating them and working through them, it's going to, the other people of this world are going to be like, hey, there's something wrong. Because why? Because that protection's not there anymore. That power's not there anymore that she had when she was with the beast, before her and these 10 horns started having their difficulties.
Can't cover up anymore. Can't cover up anymore.
Right, they can't cover it up anymore. It's exposed. And then it says, and they shall eat her flesh. So if you look at the symbolism of that, if you eat food, right, it nourishes you, it becomes part of you. So when they're saying here, they shall eat her flesh, and flesh is talking about people, it's talking about human nature of the flesh. And what is the human nature of our flesh is at odds with our spirit. So all these individuals, these wooders, they're going to consume them. They're going to make them part of the beast kingdom. And that's where these 10 heads get their kingdom. And it talked about over here in verse 12. It says, and the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom yet, but after they are at odds with this woman and take over what she has, then they will receive their kingship, their power for that short time with the beast. So this is what is happening here. And this all goes back to verse 1, where this angel is saying, I'm going to show you the judgment of the whore. That's what this is. This is a decision against this whore. And we're going to get into that into verse 17 a little more. But that's what's going on here. So after these 10 heads, after they consume or take over this kingdom she has with commerce and trade with all the peoples throughout the world, which, by the way, after it's exposed, it's going to start to, go away and diminish just like her, because it's not going to be able to function anymore. It says they're going to burn her with fire. So when you burn something with fire, when you take a log and put it on a fire outside and you burn it, it changes, right? Mm-hmm. It's not a piece of a tree anymore. It's all ashes. So what this is saying is they're going to take her kingdom and turn it into something else, right? It's not going to be this commerce and trade anymore. It's going to go in a new direction, a different direction. And in verse 17, this is like the biggest verse here. It says, for God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will and to agree. So when God puts something in their hearts, it means he's putting this desire in them. So this came from God. It says God did this. He put this desire in the 10 horns to want what this woman, this whore, has, and to take it over for the beast. That's what this is saying here. And when the words to fulfill and to agree, they're from the same Greek word, and it means to do a purpose. So let's think about that for a minute. God put it in their hearts. And I thought, that was new to me. I've never heard a sermon on somebody saying, God's going to put this in your heart because he has a plan and this is what he's going to do. I had never heard that before. And I'm reading this and I'm like, wow, that's something I've never even contemplated before. And I started going through scripture, and I found another place where the same thing happened, back in the Old Testament. With Samson. Probably, we've all heard about Samson, right? He was a judge in Israel before they had the kings, before Saul or David were kings. And he was known, had the Nazarite vow. And he was known for his strength, right? That he had this long hair, and as long as he didn't cut his hair, he had this strength. And that was part of his vow. Well, if we go back to Judges 13, chapter 5, this is when the angel comes to his mother and tells her that she's going to have this baby and that he's going to be a Nazarite, which means he had to have certain restrictions with what he could eat and drink and certain things he had to do. And he tells his mother that this child has a specific purpose in life. This child is going to begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. So God is telling his mother that you're going to have this baby, and this baby is going to grow up, and he's going to start to be the vessel that I'm going to use to help deliver Israel from the Philistines, because at this time, the Philistines had conquered Israel, and they were, just like in Jesus's day, the Romans kind of controlled what was going on. Well, back in the day when Samson was born, the Philistines were in that same type of position. They controlled Israel to some respects. So then we go to chapter 14, and this is when Samson is a grown man. And it says, Samson went down to Timnath and saw a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. And it says in verse 2 that he loved this woman. He wanted to marry her. And he went to his parents in verse 3 and he said, Mom and Dad, I want to marry this woman. And back in that day, the parents would get together and they would work out this marriage proposal and how they were going to go about it, because there were dowries involved and all that. And his parents in verse 3, they're like, wait a minute, she's a Philistine. You know, it's not common practice for our people to marry outside of Israel. Not that it didn't happen, but it wasn't, you know, something that was common, and parents didn't want their children marrying, especially a Philistine, right, in that day. And then it says in Samson, you know, he pushed his parents and they eventually did do what he wanted. But it says in verse 4, and this is the verse I really wanted to point out here. It says, his father and his mother knew not that it was of the Lord. So this was of the Lord that Samson loved this woman, right? This desire for her, God put in his heart. It says, for at that time God sought an occasion against the Philistines. So this was how God was going to start to bring around his plan for Samson to deliver Israel from the hand of the Philistines. And then we see here that he does the same thing with these demonic forces. That's how powerful he is. He can even control these demonic forces and what their desires are and what they do. And he did it with these 10 horns to go, because he's bringing this decision against this woman, the whore, and he's using the other members of the dark kingdom, of the beast kingdom, to do it, and they're going to take it over and make everything she had part of the beast kingdom. And we're going to get back to that in a minute here after we finish up verse 18. But it says, and the woman which thou sawest in verse 18, now it's back to talking to her again about as she's a woman, which means it's talking about her as being loyal to the kingdom of darkness. She is that great city. That word is, if you look it up, it means to exist or be, you know. So she exists as this great city. And back in verse 5 of 17, it tells us, on her forehead is written the word Babylon the Great. And we've all heard the name of Babylon. It was an actual city at one time, known for its idolatry and a lot of immorality that took place there. Well, in our day and age, it's not going to be a city, a physical city, but it's going to be the symbolism of it. And if you think of a city, right, say, you know, Philadelphia or New York City. Now, if you're like me and you think the same way I do, I think of the buildings. We call the cities a concrete jungle, right? There's not a lot of trees. There's buildings, there's streets, there's sidewalks, and it's hard to find a lot of greenery, except for that maybe they have a tree growing up, you know, with all cement around its roots growing. I could never understand how those trees survived when we'd go to Philadelphia when I was a kid, but that's what we think of when we think of a city. We think of the buildings. Well, in the Greek mindset, that's not what they thought of. To them, it was just a place where there was a lot of people, a dense population. That's what they would think of. If you said, I'm going to the city, they knew you meant that you were going to the place where all the people gathered and all the people lived, right? It was a dense population. So when it says here, this woman is that great city, it's actually saying that woman exists as the peoples, right? The Wooders, the peoples throughout this world, the population. This is where she comes through, and this is how she exists. And it says, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. So she is going to be existing as these people that rule, the leaders of this world. Because the kings of the earth, we've talked about before, is just talking about the rulers, whether they be presidents or kings or prime ministers. And I thought about this and I thought, you know, well, how can that be? Because we think of it as the opposite, right? We think of it as our leaders rule us. But if you think about it, how does anybody get into power? Back in the 15, 16, 1700s, when there were mainly kings, it was whoever had the biggest army, right? Whoever got the most people with them. And it's not really any different today, because if you think about it, even in our elections, whether it be local or state or federal government representatives, it's whoever gets the most people to back them up and vote for them. So by this whore, or this woman rather, in this verse, in her role as, you know, her loyalty to this beast, she gets all these people and she can manipulate them and control them, what they do and how they go, and uses them to help put people in power that would do the bidding of the beast kingdom. But going back to verse 17, all that has changed because the 10 horns now have taken over her kingdom. So we're going to go back and we're going to look at the vials again here real quick. Because remember, this is stuff that is more detailed of what happened during the vials. So if we go back to chapter 16, verse 10, it's the 5th vial. It says, the 5th angel poured out his vial upon the seat of the beast. So this angel, right, from God is taken, and we talked about the vials. The vials were God's intervention. They're going to happen all, closest to the time of Christ's return. And what they are is it's God's intervention in this world for everything this beast kingdom has been doing. And here we see at this 5th vial, he's pouring it upon the seat of the beast. So he's pouring it upon the control, right, the authority of the beast. And part of that authority was this woman. Well, when he pours this vial, what happens? That's when this takes place, because God put in their hearts this desire for the 10 horns to take from this woman what she had and give it to the beast. And that's when this started taking place. And then we see after that, we go to verse 12 for the 6th vial. And if we go down to verse 13, it says that he saw unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. So the woman's not here, right? It's just talking about the dragon, Satan, the beast from the bottomless pit, and the false prophet. It says they're the spirit of devils, which go forth where? To the kings of the earth and the whole world. So this is after then, the 6th vial is after these horns take over the kingdom of this woman, this whore, and they become the kings, the 10 kings, and they go with the beast to the kings of the earth and the whole world. And this is where I talked about how they took her kingdom and they took it away from commerce and trade, and they're going to turn it into something else by burning it with fire. Well, this is what they turn it into. They get the kings of the whole world, the kings of the earth and the whole world to gather together to do battle for the great day of God Almighty. And the great day of God Almighty is the day when Jesus returns. So this is what these two things are talking about in more detail of what's going on. And then in verse 15 we see, behold, I come as a thief. So that's the return of Jesus. So what these 10 horns want to do, and God, this is all part of God's plan, because he knows Jesus is coming back, and he gets these 10 horns to take over this kingdom and then stop all this commerce and trade and all this stuff that's wrong from going on by exposing it. But then all those that were involved in that, they do what? They come to the beast kingdom and the 10 horns, and they prepare for that day when Jesus returns to try to fight against him and stop him, which isn't going to happen, but that's what they do. And that's why it also says, and it's only going to be for an hour with the beast, because it's only going to be for a short time when they have this control, because Jesus is coming back. So that's where we're going to stop tonight. And we'll start chapter 18 next month. Now, usually last year, the month after Easter, we did a pizza party. Does everybody want us to do a pizza party next month again? Come in and bring pizza, is that good? All right, you like that still? Okay. All right, we'll do that.